All right, let's give this another minute or two as people log in.
I think most everybody here has been at our meetings recently, but if you would like, I can go ahead and give the pre-meeting talking points of how to engage in Zoom.
Please go ahead. Will, thank you.
All
Let's get
right. Well,
started.
welcome everyone. If you're joining us for the first time or first time in a long time, you're going to notice right now that you're muted, and everybody's going to stay muted through the duration of the meeting, except for our co-chairs and anybody who they call on. You can participate in the meeting by going to the reactions icon on your device and pressing the raise hand button. It's not the wave or the thumbs up; those will disappear. Only press the raise hand button once, because if you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling in from the phone, it's star and the number 9 to raise your hand, and then star and 6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt on your device asking you to confirm unmuting once one of the co-chairs calls on you. And if you're having any problems, you can chat me. The chat is available for technical support to help with Zoom software problems. It's not to ask questions or make comments to the co-chairs. They'll never see those chats. And finally, if you're using an older version of Zoom, you can go to the participants section where you might find the raise hand feature there. We encourage you not to raise your actual hand or wave at the screen to get our attention, because we might miss you and not be able to see you. So if you're having problems, chat me. I'm here for support. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Elizabeth and Adam, and they can get the meeting on the way.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. Good to be back. It's particularly gratifying since we don't have an assigned set day of the week and week of the month for our meetings. So you have to work hard to find us. So I'm going to actually open the meeting with, please mark your calendars. We actually know the date of our next meeting. Our next meeting will be on Thursday, May 2nd. So book your calendars now. And we hope to see you then. And with that, I'm going to turn back over to Adam to get us started.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Let me just, if I can share my screen.
Should be able to, Adam.
Yes, I can. And put this in presentation mode. So this is the task force for residential rezoning, evening's meeting of March 27th. So the overview of agenda, we've modified it very slightly, but we're going to talk about the asphalt green block on off of York Avenue. We're going to discuss developing a survey for residents and stakeholders of the study blocks that are the target of our rezoning efforts, and the preliminary hypotheses guiding principles for proposed zoning selection. So since this has all started, there's already been some changes to the zoning map. As of March 19th, the parcel on 94th Street, known as the Friedland rezoning, is no longer M14, and it has been rezoned. And we wanted to address that just at the outset. We're calling that agenda item 0. So originally, the proposal was for, I believe, 484 feet, and successful negotiations coupled with the input from the board helped bring the height down and also materially increase the percentage of affordable units from 25% to 34%. The AMIs were shifted upwards somewhat, so from a 40% and 60% AMI to mostly 80% AMI. And there was a commitment for a child care facility in the commercial space on the grade level, as well as a $150,000 commitment for James Cagney Plaza. I'm going to editorialize. I do not speak for the committee or for Elizabeth, but I had hoped that the demolition of 393 parking spaces might have been coupled with a preservation of a small portion, or at least a significant portion of those parking spaces. It seems as of now that that is not going to happen. I think the effects will be significant for those who park up there when you're getting rid of 10% of the supply. So we'll see what happens on that front. So this is, now we're back to item 1, which Elizabeth has the expertise in.
Okay. So asphalt green, the block that contains asphalt green is one of the M14 blocks that remains in our community board area. And this is a photograph actually that I took from their website that just gives you a sense of the scale of this block and its current state as a, an open space, a recreational space. I think there's a lot of positive feeling about how this organization has taken what was a completely disused space and turned it into something incredibly vibrant and popular and useful in the community. So within this context of looking at identifying rezoning for residential purposes, we wanted to treat this separately as sort of how do we think about this? It is not like some of the other properties that we have looked at where we're seeing, small commercial buildings. This is an actively used, I think, in even though it is somewhat private, in that you become a member or you take classes or you sign up for a camp. It is an actively used part of the community. So with that in mind, let's go to the next slide. There are a couple things that we know. One is that it is a city-owned piece of property. It is leased by Asphalt Green from the Parks Department. However, it does not show up on the zoning maps as parkland. And so that is a question and a concern. And at least our hypothesis that we would like to discuss this evening and have this task force engage in a dialogue about this is our hypothesis is that for this property, we think the goal might be better served to preserve open and recreational space rather than convert this to residential use. And that this is kind of a balance, that if we are creating greater residential development in the surrounding community, also creating and preserving open recreational space would be a good complement for our community. And so we have actually asked the Parks Department if they can investigate whether or not this is in fact already designated as parkland. And we'd like to understand, and we have invited the Parks Department to attend our next meeting. We actually invited them to attend this meeting, but they were unable to do so, and I'll speak to that in a minute, to talk to us about the potential implications of designating this block, or frankly, any, as well as any block, as parkland, as part of a broader rezoning effort. And obviously this block, there are potential implications for Asphalt Green, the organization that leases the space. But it would also be helpful in general to understand and have more information about designating any block as parkland. And so in this effort, we thought that this might make a potentially good balance, more residential opportunity, but also coupled with let's preserve some open space and some recreation space in our community, rather than look at every parcel and say, well, this all has to become residential. So that is our hypothesis that we wish to discuss tonight. We have, in fact, I have met with the executive director of Asphalt Green to make sure that they would be aware of this idea. Obviously, I've also spoken with our new Manhattan Borough Commissioner of Parks, Tricia Shimamura, our former fellow Community Board 8 member. This transition at Parks is part of why they were not able to join this evening. From the time we started saying, who can at Parks should we talk to, well, if you wait a week, it'll be Tricia, to Tricia needing to get her legs underneath her. As she put it, she has spent the entire week being trained and learning things in Queens and does not even know where the bathrooms are at her Manhattan office. I think it's totally appropriate to give her a pass, but they have already begun an investigation into what is the specific status of this property in terms of zoning and where it fits within sort of the parks portfolio. Is it in fact parkland or not? And I guess rather than sort of do our whole presentation on all topics, let's sort of pause here and open up to questions or comments, first from non-board members and then from board members.
So just a reminder, if you'd like to comment or ask a question, go to the reactions icon on your device and press the raise hand button. You have Elizabeth Suarez and then Diego Barbarina.
Okay, Elizabeth, and please tell us what the organization ARQNY is.
Actually, sorry, I'm just connecting from my office. I'm an architect. I don't want to advertise my right now, but no, I am a neighbor. So one question I have, I've been following the progress of this over the past year. I am very glad to hear you guys are actually looking at this block. My background is architecture and planning, so this is, and I live on 94, so this is very personal to me. So one question I just have on this block of asphalt green is, in the process of considering that this will be kept as green, which I would love to see if we can, this can be actually locked, as it's really important for the community. I just want to know if this is perceived as the only space that's going to be proposed as green space. And again, I haven't seen the development of the other parts of the presentation tonight, but one of my concerns overall in the proposed rezoning is what are the different programs and what are the different arrangements of those programs, right? Whether I hope we're not having all this high density just allocated in one block or two blocks and then open areas very far off. And it's, again, it's all within a range, but I think because I live on 94 and I know very much that block and what's going on right now with a lot of pollution from the construction across this, like on the north side of the block, and the noise and all of that. So I'm just, and there's it's a very deserted area in terms of green space, 94 and the other block on 90th Street, 91st. So I just wanted to hear if this is just the only portion of the proposal that's going to be kept as green, or if you guys have something else later on that might also include other spaces.
So great question, and thank you so much for being here. What I'd say is we're not at a stage of a proposal yet. We are at the stage of investigating and developing hypotheses and developing a potential proposal, but we don't have a proposal yet. So that's what the purpose of the task force is. That said, what makes this particular space, I think, so important in terms of a potential designation as parkland or maintaining it as green space is that this is the only property in all of the blocks that we're looking at, I think, that is owned by the city. and that therefore the city has some control over. It's not, we are not able to identify property that is currently owned by you know, in the private sector and say that should become green space. That should become a park instead of being either the commercial building or manufacturing type building that it is today or a future residential building. So I don't know that there will be proposals specifically for other new green space, but that's largely because we don't even necessarily have that kind of control. It's entirely possible that if we are able to propose an upzoning, that there may be property owners who in the process of their development may say, I'd be interested in, you know, creating some green space in exchange for frequently greater height or greater density. But that's not something that we have control over.
Okay, thank you.
No, great question. Thank you. Next, we have Diego Barbarena.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I think what you just said about asphalt green and making sure that it's represented as a park or clarified the park is very important. I think the same is the case for Rupert Park, that we all assume it's a park. But if you see the zoning drawings, they don't appear to be a park. And there was like this issue with the Marx Brothers Playground on 96th Street and 2nd Avenue, that there was a lawsuit because the city said it was not a park, it was a playground, and by that, it didn't have the park protection. So they wanted to do this building. And that's why we don't have a playground anymore at the corner. We have just like an empty lot with gravel. So I think this, what you're doing is very important to make sure that nobody comes and builds a tower or something there. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I don't see anyone else from the public. So you have Ed. Oh, no, Andrew.
Andrew Dubinsky.
Andrew, you can unmute.
Yeah, I would. I'm assuming you can see me and hear me. I would just echo. All things equal, I would much rather this change from its existing use to a park. I live on 91st Street. I actually don't think I can use asphalt green that much if I'm not a member. I don't use it. If you're not signed up, or your kids aren't signed up in a soccer club, the fields are often locked. So all things equal, as someone who lives in the area, I'd much rather it be a park that had a lot more open access than its current use, which is kind of I don't know what you would call it, a membership park than a real park. And then obviously high density residential, big loss in terms of green space. I mean, I understand the needs of housing, but just shortage of green space in this area is obviously was already noted. But yeah, that would just be, those are my points.
Thank you. And you are correct that this is, at the moment, this is a membership organization. There are free memberships available, particularly for, I believe, residents of the Isaac Holmes houses or the Isaacs houses. But it is not the same as a park. And I don't know that even if this were to be designated parkland, that it would become a more open access park. I think there is a lot of value in what Asphalt Green, the organization, is doing and bringing in their programming. But I think that's a great question as part of this conversation. Are there opportunities for this to become even more open access? Thank you. Okay, Ed Hartzog.
Thanks. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Adam. I wanted to go back to the first one on 94th Street. That's why I raised my hand.
Sure.
My question was, in this negotiation for affordable housing. I heard, Council Member Menon talking about it at our last meeting up at Chapin the other night. So we got less height, which is good. I'm all for that. And we got more affordable units, but drilling down into that, because, the existential question is, what is the definition of affordable, which is not for here. But my question is, I saw that in order to get less height and more, quote, affordability, we had to move from 40 and 60% AMI to 80% AMI. And my question was, just for the public and for the meeting, what the income bandwidths were, if you could just recite those for us, for the folks here who don't know that off the top of their head. If you could tell them what the trade-off was with respect to those income bands, and whether and where that fits with respect to the neighborhood surrounding area that's going to be directly impacted by that. Thanks.
So I will start talking and give on a fairly quick round basis. You're absolutely right. And I don't know that, and here's now where I will editorialize, that Adam had that privilege a little bit earlier. I don't know that the change to an increase in more studio apartments and reducing larger apartments is what the community board was hoping for as part of this negotiation. In fact, several times in the full board meeting when we were discussing this and developing our resolution, we were going the opposite direction. And I believe our resolution called on increasing the number of larger apartments, particularly 3-bedroom apartments, rather than decreasing them. So in many ways, this negotiation did not have some of the results that any of us were hoping for. And I think the switch from larger apartments to studios is a perfect example of that. And you can see here we've detailed the change, that there are 62 more studios than originally planned, and 41 fewer 1-bedrooms, 16 fewer 2-bedrooms, and 4 fewer 3-bedrooms in the final deal. On the AMIs, and I'm gonna not attempt to answer what that dollar amount is. Maybe Adam can look it up. The interesting thing here about the AMIs is there are two things that I would observe. The first is that when you go from the 25% of FAR of floor area and units to 30% or higher of floor area and units, the AMI change is part and parcel of that. There are two different options that a developer can use. And the notion, I guess, being that the more units you have that are restricted, you need to get more rent sort of from each of them, a little bit more rent from each of them, and therefore it's got to go to a higher AMI. On the more positive front, one of the things that we heard in meetings leading up to the land use meeting was that at 60% AMI and 40% AMI, teachers would be priced out. They earn too much to qualify. But at 80% AMI and some units at 120% AMI, this is more workforce housing than truly low income housing. And so now all of a sudden, this development might have units available for early professional teachers, for people working in the public sector, for civil.
Yeah, I see. I looked it up. I see the
certainly from the comments on prior hearings, prior meetings, would be perceived pretty positively in the community.
Yeah, I was going to say, for a family of 4 at 40% AMI, it's 56,480, and at 80%, it's 112. Just looking on the HPD, I'll put that in the chat, or I'll put it in the chat, and then Will can put it out there. It's the HPD, AMI.
Mhm.
Anyway, thanks. I appreciate that, Elizabeth. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Ed. Gail?
Thanks for raising this issue. I mean, when we look at particularly green space, we know in our district, we have less than any other community in the city. So I think having the asphalt green space, whether it remains in use as is or becomes a parkland and more open, is really something that is of vital importance to our neighborhood, because even if you're not using asphalt green, you walk by, having that open space gives you a very different feeling, and it impacts light and air and all the other issues that really are important. I'm curious as far as the lease that Asphalt Green has with the Parks Department. What are the terms, the length? Is there any reason that we would assume that if it's not a long-term lease that it wouldn't be renewed? Or just what have you found out so far?
So I do know that the lease is coming up for renewal. Basically, I think they are 7 years out. And the Parks Department starts negotiating renewals for property that they lease when they are within 5 years of expiration. So this is something that's very timely.
Okay.
Because we do know that this lease is not at the moment what you would consider a super long-term lease. I think there's about 7 years, and this is something that would be coming up for renegotiation. To my knowledge, I have no reason to believe that it wouldn't be renewed. I certainly know that Asphalt Green would like to renew the lease, and they are certainly thinking about their long-term future. And I can certainly share that the conversations I've had with them, they also would like to understand what it might mean if this were developed, if this might be designated parkland. That might be a good thing. I don't think anybody, certainly not the goal of this task force, is to remove Asphalt Green as an organization. And I don't want to suggest that with this hypothesis in any way, shape, or form. I think the question is, how do we as a community ensure that this space stay open and for recreation purposes over a very long period of time? And understanding whether a parkland designation would make sense for that, would accomplish that goal, and would keep this space active as it has really been revitalized over the past, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years. That's what we're trying to understand.
Terrific. Thank you.
Okay, Sahar.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for this. This is an amazing meeting. So thanks, Adam. Thanks, Elizabeth. I just had a question that if it is designated as parks land, would that change? Because I know there's a building component where the swimming pool is. There is a little bit of an outdoor space where there's some, I don't know, I wouldn't even call them swings, but like some spaces, swings and others that, like, people can walk in and take their kids in, even if they're not using the facility. And then of course we have that huge, field. So would that change anything? If it does, it is designated under the parks once it's done, even if we assume that parks is going to like lease it out to asphalt after those 6-7 years are done?
So those are exactly the questions that we are hoping to understand from Parks Department. We don't know the answer. You're asking the exact same questions that I am wondering about myself.
Right. And I was just wondering if that could also entail making a little bit of more green space or more public use space within asphalt. As I was just listening to one of our neighbors, he was mentioning that, yes, asphalt is amazing, but it is not accessible to everyone. So maybe having a little more kind of a mix, hybrid situation would maybe something that would be more beneficial, and maybe, I don't know if it can be proposed.
That is the purpose of these discussions, and hopefully ongoing discussions, learning more from parks. Thank you. Okay. Craig.
Hi, everyone. I figured I'd say hi as I'm literally walking by Asphalt Green, so this is not a background as you see me. To just answer one of the questions, where the swings are and stuff, that is actually Jacobit's playground, so that should technically already be park space, I believe. We've had many discussions regarding that when talking about all the issues with the East 91st Street Marine Transfer Station. So I don't think that's really part of that equation. Overall, I just want to lend my support to the idea that we've been talking about tonight with preserving this as park space long-term through zoning, regardless of who has control over it. And I do want to just add that many times the front gates, at least by the old asphalt building, as you can see right behind me, are open, and there's access to the basketball courts right behind me. And there are times where you could look on the calendar and see when the fields are actually open. Since I live literally right across the street from it, my son would spend a lot of time going to here and playing both on the basketball court and on the fields. So while, yes, it is largely membership based, there are opportunities for the public to be able to come in and use it. So I just want to make sure everyone was aware of that. So again, thank you both, Elizabeth and Adam, for initiating this discussion. And I'm probably signing off in a minute, but thank you for listening.
Craig, we may discuss 62nd Street, so I'm going to send you out for a live report down to 62nd Street. So why don't you head down that way and give us a live report from the Bentley Hotel.
Craig has a future as a television reporter.
I always had a dream of being an on-air meteorologist, but I'll enjoy this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll go back to Ed Hartzog.
Yeah, I had a question as to the parkland. A couple of things. One, with respect to the Marine Transfer Station, it is literally cheek to jowl right there. I was curious just what the truck traffic is like. I remember when that was going up, how controversial it was. A lot of talk about what the traffic would be. I don't know what it is. We used to live on 89th, so I don't live as close anymore. My other question as to this becoming quote unquote parkland, and I don't know what the legal definitions are, not necessarily if there are specific ones in the city for that. But given that, I believe, they call it asphalt green for a reason. I don't know if that's where they were like making asphalt or.
It used to be an asphalt plant.
That's an asphalt plant. So my question is.
Yeah, which is, I think, why this was zoned for M14.
Right. Is that, can you turn that into parkland without some sort of major, is there going to be some kind of requirement if you're going to turn that into parkland, that's some kind of major remediation, as opposed to, because that field is not grass, that is an artificial field, which I would imagine probably some kind of, I would be speculating, but it would be asphalt and then some sort of padding on top of that for the field. So if you're going to tear that up and then expose it, my question is, is there a remediation issue because it was an asphalt plant? And also, are you going to be putting a park next to a location? And I guess this goes to the existential question as to that transfer station. Is the truck traffic for that station not there, so that this really is just a backdoor way, big shocker in any kind of land use decision in this city, or any kind of policy decision, the oblique angles, is this really just going to be a future spot for ferry service, which I wouldn't oppose, at that location? Because now, of course, we have infrastructure there and we can just swap it out for landing. Maybe they're landing ferries further uptown. I don't know. Anyway, just throwing that out there.
So I can give a little bit of commentary on the truck situation. Apparently it is much lower in terms of truck traffic than it was originally expected to be. And in fact, there was originally a plan to build a bridge specifically to serve the trucks, to go basically sort of over and through the asphalt green space to the marine transfer station. Not only has that never happened, the city has in fact taken back the budget, that the funds that were earmarked for it. So that does not seem to be in the cards. And apparently, and again, this I have heard from Asphalt Green, apparently private carting services don't want to go there to drop off waste. They say it's too expensive.
Right. We can't can't go into their that group of folks is action, if you will.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, Craig, and then we will move on to our next topic. Craig, you still have your hand up.
Yes, I'm still here. Sorry.
Okay.
New background this time from my living room. So just to answer a few of those questions that Ed posed, and following up on your response, yes, the truck traffic has been relatively at bay. I am one of the co-chairs of the East 91st Street Marine Transfer Station Community Advisory Group, and we've been monitoring the truck traffic there, and it has been maintained at very low levels. There are some questions as to what the future is going to be, because there are some RFPs that are out there for potential commercial tipping at marine transfer station facilities. We don't know what interest they may or may not have in this facility, but that's something that we are continuing to monitor, and I'll be happy to provide updates in future meetings here or at whatever appropriate committee meetings at Community Board 8, where we may wish to talk about that. In terms of the ferry proposal and other uses, I think and the potential ramp. So the ramp is currently not funded, and every time we have a meeting, we always ask about where the ramp stands, and there is currently no funding in place for it. It's a question as to whether that will ever happen or not. There has frankly been very little momentum recently for that actually happening. The city doesn't seem particularly motivated by it. They are aware of the community board's position in favor of a ramp, and certainly our community advisor group has talked about that, but I would be very surprised if we were to see that come to fruition, especially with the reduced amounts of truck traffic. And a ramp that would be on the 92nd Street side would reduce the environmental impacts to the asphalt green facility and reduce potential conflicts at the 91st Street intersection, but there are potential other issues that could arise if you flipped it around. So all of that would have to be looked into, and that will probably take years if we were to actually move in that direction. And then finally, in terms of the ferry terminal, I just see that as being very unlikely, because I don't see the city being willing to move from their facility to reuse the current facility for another purpose. It would be a very large facility for a ferry, and it would take a lot of investment in order to convert that over. So that's probably something that was more of a dream than a reality, a likely reality at any point. So I hope that information is helpful as we look at the whole context of that area.
That's super. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's see if we can summarize this portion of the conversation. It sounds like there's pretty unanimous support for ensuring that this block continue as open and recreational space, and perhaps even like to see an expansion of access to this space. So everybody, please come back on May 2nd, when we will hopefully have some greater information from Parks Department as to what the possibilities are and what the potential implications are. Okay, moving on. Adam, your turn.
So the next group of items we want to talk about have to do with getting from here to there, which is to say how to take community input into what we think everyone thinks the rezoning should look like for the various areas. You know, we have rezoning, we have potential rezonings in the 90s, in the 70s, in the 60s. So what we really need to do is have a stakeholder survey, and we're going to need help conducting this. That help may come in the form of financial help, if we have a budget, and efforts, you know, rallying all of the various stakeholders that are going to be and should be involved in this discussion. And those stakeholders can include students at the various schools, shoppers, tenants, and building owners, as well as just general community members who live in the neighborhood. So what we've discussed internally is that CB8 does not have the experience or expertise designing or conducting the quantitative research. And we are going to need help doing that or understanding how we can do that internally. We need to also understand what budget we have available, whether that comes from the council members, or whether that comes from the borough president, or whether that comes from our internal community board budgets. And we want to understand what are the other ways we can get local residents more aware of the task force efforts. And that's going to be where our committee members or task force members can help step up and assist us in our efforts. So one of the things Elizabeth and I were speaking with Will about is, I don't know that we have a current tally of our task force membership. And all of you who are currently considered members of the task force, if you'd like to email us and clarify your status, that would be great. Because we certainly aim to enlist you in these efforts. So I think that the discussion we would like to have now, and it may be something that's formed later, is how to conduct a survey to get everybody involved, and what topics are going to be important to focus on to identify everyone's priorities for putting forth these rezoning efforts. We understand there may not be thoughts at the moment, but if there are, we would love to hear them. And if anyone has any ideas about how to gain or enlist experience or expertise to conduct some quantitative research, that would be extremely helpful. So I see Gail raised her hand.
Sorry. One of the thoughts I have, and of course it's going to be based on timing, is going to some of the graduate schools like SEPA up at Columbia. Also, there's the capstone project at NYU. And, you know, these young people are pretty skilled in different types of quantitative analysis. I'm the president of a foundation, and we have used the NYU students in the past to do some studies for us, and they've done a really good job. So that's one possibility of seeing whether or not we might be able to enlist them. In the past, REBNY used to work with nonprofits. I don't know if they've ever worked, because we're a city agency, but seeing whether or not they may have a template, because I'm sure that they go out and they do their own surveys for developers when they're looking at development of certain sites, and just to see whether or not they might be able to provide some expertise or some suggestions as to how we might be able to accomplish this, either at no fee or something that would be appreciably reduced, because we don't know what type of money, discretionary funds, we're going to get. from Councilmember Menon or Councilmember Powers. So I would think if we could just figure out a way to get the expertise at no fee, that would be a way to help to ensure that we can move forward with that type of survey.
Those are excellent suggestions. I think Rebney might blow the entire budget on the 421A fight, but once they replenish their coffers, once they fill the coffers back up, maybe we can have them help.
At least we can reach out and ask.
Of course. I think it was Michelle is next.
Yes, thank you. I actually conducted 3 studies using interns from Hunter. Mostly, I found the best benefit was in the graduate school, and they were either interested in city planning or taking a master's in some relevant topic to, having to do with neighborhoods and cities and plannings. I did one on evaluating the resolutions and what effect our resolutions, whether or not how they were adjudicated at the various city agencies. That was about a 6-year study. I did another one on with an intern from Hunter, where we gathered when we were working on vendor issues to get a handle of how many fruit vendors, how many, truck vendors, how many this and that in the whole community board area. And a wonderful map, a color-coded map was created. So I think there's a lot of possibilities out there in order to get, and these kids get, community credit for it. So they're very anxious to do it. And some of these programs actually offer a stipend, a small stipend, but to these students. So that's definitely worth looking into. And Hunter has been very collaborative, and they have a department that actually handles this. So I would suggest that. What I do need further clarification on is I'm not sure what this stakeholder survey is looking for. What is your aim? Or don't you have one yet, but you're just thinking that that's what needs to be formulated? My understanding of this original task force was to convert manufacturing to residential. I thought that that was the aim. And now it was a question for me, because there are all kinds of different residential zones. And at past meetings, I had raised a favorite of mine, which is the R10A. Another favorite is, of course, the R8 in the mid-block, in keeping the height limits. I don't know how successful we would be in this current climate of doing that, but it would depend on what the current streetscape was in a given area that would or could inform what we're proposing for that area. For example, in the 60s, lots of brownstone, height limit on those blocks. Now, of course, the 90s are more mixed up, and now with the new project coming in, that certainly is going to set another precedent. So if you could clarify for me, what is it that this stakeholder survey is going to be studying, and how that informs the residential districts that we're attempting to create?
Yep. So I'm so glad you asked that question. You are absolutely accurate that the goal of this task force is to propose rezoning manufacturing and commercial zoned blocks to residential zoned blocks. Within that, there are trade-offs. Do height versus density versus open space versus narrow and tall versus squat and low. There may be more things to that. And so we've had some conversation about them, and I think we have some hypotheses based on the people who have been attending this task force. But I think the suggestion for a survey was to try to broaden the input. And so actually, I know, Valerie, this was originally your suggestion, and you're on the Zoom. Can we unmute you if you want to clarify what you were hoping to get out of the survey? Is Valerie still with us? Yes, she's
in the room, but her camera is not on. And
so, Michelle,
yeah.
I think the goal, I think Valerie's goal in the suggestion, and she can clarify, was make sure more people are aware of and have an opportunity to weigh in, and make sure that we have an understanding of local trade-offs and what the different parts of this area might think, because it may be different in the 90s versus the 60s and the 70s.
If I can just follow up, Elizabeth, because I'm still not clear, and I'm sure you have something in mind. What do you mean by trade-offs? For example, let's say we had a block in the 60s and we looked at the streetscape and in making a decision, and that streetscape indicated to us that it was mainly, brownstones, and that had a certain height limit, or it's the Treadwell Farms district, and this new district would abut that, and how are we going to respect that, and blah, blah, blah. That kind of thing. What is it that we're looking for in a situation like that you would call a trade-off? I'm just not understanding.
And I don't have a specific for you, because at the moment, I don't think we're at that level of knowledge or detail about any one specific block. But let's use, for example, in any block, regardless. And I don't think we have anything abutting Treadwell Farms. So let's leave that one out. But we do have the block of the Animal Medical Center and the Bentley Hotel. Is the goal there to preserve, to convert the existing building to residential, or are we open to, or really making that, maximizing the use of the Bentley Hotel property to become a larger, more densely zoned residential block? Those are trade-offs. Do you maximize the total potential square footage, which also means maximizing the potential affordable square footage for housing? Or, on that particular block, do you try to minimize change?
Okay, I guess we have to examine it block by block. I'm trying to understand, only because I would want to we need to come up with questions. If you're creating surveys, we need to come up with questions that have to be addressed. And I'm thinking, for example, the example that you gave, I think we all agree when we approved the new plans for the animal hospital, that's a valuable community facility that's worth preserving, and I thought there was a consensus not to necessarily interfere with their current development.
We all agree with that, Michelle.
Yeah. And then as far as the Bentley is concerned, that is an existing structure. It has a use. And I'm not sure how we would approach any changes to that structure. I'm not picturing in my mind's eye, but I would have to look. I am not picturing other actual structures on that block between York and the river, that specific one anyway.
We can be very specific about that block, because it's really two buildings and two lots.
Exactly.
The Bentley Hotel is currently a hotel. We don't determine whether there's a change to the building. What we can determine is a change to the zoning, or what we can propose is a change to the zoning. Let's say we propose to rezone that residential. Do we propose to rezone that with the same residential FAR that the current building is? Or do we propose to rezone that at a higher FAR and in hopes of maximizing the potential housing there? Those are trade-offs.
Yeah,
And
okay, I understand.
I don't know that the survey is going to be the right tool
Yeah.
to make that kind of a decision. I agree with you. I think this is a very tough topic to use a survey on, but I want to respect, which is partially why I'm very concerned about, we don't have this expertise, but I want to respect Valerie's suggestion that we do a survey. And so I want to explore what is doable and what's realistic given the subject matter.
Okay, well, I look forward to hearing from her, because if she suggested that, I'm sure she had something in mind as to what it is that we're surveying. So I look forward to more information on that. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Elizabeth Suarez.
I just had I guess, a question, just expanding a little bit on Michelle's point. What I was understanding from the development of the proposed rezoning was, given the numbers that have been developed, the next phase will be understanding the timeline for this survey. And again, by survey, what I was envisioning was a visual representation of what this translates to. I think it's important to understand the fabric of each block, or again, it's mostly the areas that are being proposed for rezoning, and within the fabric of that block and what is already currently proposed and approved, right? See the massing and how that translates. And I think then those, it's mostly developing the schemes, right? So it's either you go with, again, density versus height, but I think it all has to be translated into a visual representation. And one of my suggestions, which is going back to engaging in schools, is depending on the timeline that this task force develops, there might be potential where you can engage. I know for sure Cornell University Urban Planning looks into thesis, and they have a semester in New York City where and again, it could be one of those things where engaging some of the schools, and as they develop a studio, they can take over just the mapping of it and the 3D that can be given to the board. It is public anyways on SOLA, and that could be extruded from there. So, but I was just envisioning the next phase. And again, maybe it's not sure it was done yet, but translating that into a visual representation for everyone to understand heights, density, and again, there's going to be a lot. When you see it all together, I think it will tell a lot of the narrative.
Right, and we think that what may be appropriate for the mid blocks in the 90s may be wholly different than what's appropriate for the mid 70s by MSK, and that could be different than what's appropriate for the block that Elizabeth referenced, which was the Bentley Hotel and the animal shelter. And we're trying to get, I think what the point of this is to set up a way to get opinions from the various stakeholders in those areas. You know, when this was initially conceived, we had really focused on the East 90s, but then, towards the end, we just expanded it to every M14 and C84 in Community Board 8. So that by doing so, it means that we now have more areas to focus on, and we will need more input from more folks. So that's what we're challenged with at the moment. And hopefully we can develop a survey or a set of surveys that are appropriate for each of the areas we're targeting. I think Judy, yeah, there you go.
This may sound foolish, this question, but exactly, can you give me a rough number of how many blocks we're talking about in District 8?
Yes, I can give you
Yeah, we list them.
an exact number. Well, one fewer than there was before.
Okay, so it would
Or-
seem to me that if you were going to do a survey based on the prior conversation we've just had, you need a survey for each one of these areas.
That's right. That's right.
And the survey for 90th Street for Asphalt Green might be totally different than the survey where the Bentley and the Animal Hospital Center are, because it would depend on what the buildings are around, I think, around them now, what the community looks like.
I don't think we disagree with that.
So that means that you'd need about 10 surveys.
Well,
I think
10
some of
different-
these.
I think maybe 3.
Yeah, I think it's 3 different surveys. They're clusters.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there definitely is some difference in each area about the buildings that surround them.
Yeah,
You
I
would
mean,
agree.
if I may, I know I mean, it could just be one survey and there could be a question focused on different neighborhoods. Like if you want to comment on what you think might be applicable from 60 to 71st Street, or, I mean, we could choose areas for people to comment on if they felt that they wanted to differentiate between neighborhoods or uses or something like that. I mean, I think as Adam alluded to, this may take more than one survey, but, you know, we should be so lucky that we get a big response, right, guys? I mean,
Exactly.
that would be a victory in and of itself. But I see your point, Judy. It is going to be different, I think. I mean, it's just like when we were looking at the original, when we were looking at the zoning of the R8B on 67th Street, and why that block wasn't zoned like many blocks near it, with the idea that some blocks, it had already taken into account the hospital development, and that block was supposed to remain the same. We all know what happened there, but still, you know, there was a recognition that from 61 to 72nd, it was different than from 72nd to even 94th or whatever. I'm not giving the exact neighborhood correctly, but obviously, you know, differences. So
Let's go on to our next topic, because I think sort of the next topic is part of this follow on. How do we get from here to there? And then after this, if there are further suggestions or discussions on survey, we can have those conversations at the same time. Based on the meetings that we have had so far and the input that we have had thus far from people attending these committee meetings, we've developed some hypotheses around, and for those of you who were not here for the last meeting, at the last meeting, we presented a variety of different zone types and what their associated FAR and height limits would be, and compared them to what is currently the zone allowances for these different types of blocks. And then we also showed visuals of buildings that exist on the Upper East Side that represent examples of what a building built under these zoning rules looks like. And so to Elizabeth Suarez, yes, we completely agree that having visuals are incredibly helpful. And we did bring some into the discussion last week to give examples of, this is what an R10A building looks like. This is what an R7 building looks like. But from all of those conversations, we've developed a few hypotheses that we wanted to put out there and get feedback on. The first is that whatever zone type we choose or to propose, again, this is all what we would propose to city planning. We believe that the FAR should be equal to or greater than 6.5. That is the FAR that could be built as of right today on any of these locations by a community facility. So our goal here is to convert to residential, not to downzone these locations. And so any of these locations could get a 6.5 FAR community facility built tomorrow. So we think that whatever zones we would propose, the FAR would be equal to or greater than 6.5. Our second hypothesis is that we would want to propose an FAR that would ensure all or almost all of the lots on the individual block. And again, we're talking about, we do have the ability to propose a different type of zone for each one of these blocks if that's appropriate. But let's look at the specific blocks, the lots on those blocks, that we want to propose an FAR that would ensure all or almost all of the blocks would meet the minimum square footage requirements for mandatory inclusionary housing. And in particular, in this process of conversion to residential zoning, we want to minimize the potential to create a new large single-family townhouse or luxury-only developments, which would be possible for any building, new construction that's under 25,000 square feet. So that is a consideration for us. That said, those first two are about making the FAR big. This third one is how do we think about minimizing the FAR? And so let's assume that a 6.5 would be enough to make all of the lots on one block potentially development large enough to be MIH requirement. If 6.5 would do it, why would we necessarily want to propose a 10 FAR unless it were contextual on that block? So it's kind of there's maybe a sweet spot, enough to make it a property big enough so that it requires mandatory inclusionary housing, but not so much that it is either out of scale with that block or creates real incentive to tear down an existing building to put up a really big building. So there's I want that sweet spot, both pressures to make sure the FAR is high enough, but also we don't necessarily need to promise a 12 in this proposal. The next hypothesis is that we will propose a contextual zone type, as that is the only approach that provides a height limit. And what we've been hearing, I would say predominantly in these meetings, is that people are most concerned about height. That's certainly one of the core things that we heard on the 94th Street Friedland rezoning. The only way to address height is to propose a contextual zone. All contextual zone types have a height limit in their envelope. The one possible exception we do have 2 blocks in this study area that are on avenues. They are not side streets. Most of the lots that we are looking at, the blocks that we are looking at, are on mid blocks. but we do have a couple of blocks that are in fact on the avenue. And there, I think what we would really like to do is look at the block opposite, the blocks adjacent, and sort of pick one, be consistent with the other avenue buildings, zone types. And then finally, there are uses, there are things that are happening on these blocks that are valued and are good. It's not that we want to completely eliminate what's there. It's that we want any new development or any new construction to be residential rather than self-storage. And so there are ways to encourage a paired or mixed use in areas, to grandfather existing uses. And there have been many other rezonings, and Adam is more familiar with them, that have used sort of this MX designation in rezoning other manufacturing districts to provide for potential mixed use. So those are our hypotheses. And to some extent, if there's a way to incorporate these hypotheses into the survey, the survey could also give us feedback for, are these the right hypotheses, or do we hear something from the community that's very different? So I think this fits very well with the survey discussion. And with that, we'd love to open it up for discussion. Michelle, would you like to start us off?
Sure, thank you. As I'm looking at this, what I'm thinking, and I'm just throwing this out there as another approach that might get us to the same goal. And it would involve incorporating these hypotheses because of the rationales that you are offering. But I would wonder if we could talk about that we do the proposal based on the hypothesis. And I think you got these hypotheses from listening to the comments that have been happening over the past few months. So they're not coming out of thin air. They're coming from the public, from the community, from the board members. I would propose maybe that the committee, the task force, comes up with proposals, and that after we propose, that's when we open it up to the public for with a review process, to have them comment on what they think about what we've proposed. If you think it's sufficient to break it up into, say, three, you've got the 90s, the 60s, and the 70s, maybe, if you want to group them that way, or whatever, however you see feasible. And I say that because I think it would be a cleaner effort. I'm concerned that when you open up an initial plan to a public that is not necessarily zoning savvy, not that they can't be, but let's face it, I barely have the terminology at the tip of my fingers, and I'm working on this for years and years and years. Zoning is very difficult and it's very complicated. So I would think that maybe we would come up with feasibility and proposal for each of these areas, and then open it up to the public in a series of public hearings, take all of the suggestions back, those that make sense, and, weed it out as though the way actually any city agency does it. They come to us with a proposal, and we're often very, very unhappy, but it gives us an opportunity to go back and say, we don't want this, we like this, we don't want that, but we have a basis from which to work. So, and since we have the hypotheses, and these can be open for additional discussion, if you feel there might be others, or some could be combined or whatever, but put all this together and let the committee work very hard on a proposal with the support of the board, and then have forums, have, whatever we would need to enlighten the public and then ask for their input. So that's just a thought I had as I'm looking at this, and I think it might make it a little easier.
I think I'd love to hear other reactions. I think that's really thoughtful. Thank you.
Chair Mason.
Okay. Thank you all.
I think that was a thumbs up from Valerie as well.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
you guys unmuted me, but I think that's an excellent idea, because I was just about to say, I think the preliminary hypotheses and guidelines to zoning, it sounds good to those who have a little bit of a little bit of a rudimentary use of the vernacular, but it might just send us off into directions that we can't pull back. And so this is a pretty thoughtful group, and it's a manageable size. So if we put something together, I think there are representatives from different areas of our district, and we can put something together and then sort of sail it out there and see what comes back. I think, Michelle, that's an excellent idea.
Thank you. Okay, good. I look forward to working on that.
What I was imagining sort of our next group of meetings would be about, and obviously next meeting we will have Parks Department coming to talk to us about the asphalt green block, and of course we will invite Asphalt Green to be represented as well. But whether we start it at that meeting or wait for the next meeting, what I've envisioned is that the next several meetings will be very focused on the individual blocks, where we look at what's there, what are the lot sizes, what's currently there visually, and talk very specifically about what zone type would fit this set of hypotheses and goals, and work for that block, so that would be a development process to get us to a block by block potential proposal.
Agreed.
Beautiful. Other thoughts or reactions? Did we get these right? Elizabeth Suarez. Will, can we call on and unmute Elizabeth Suarez, please?
She has the option to unmute whenever she's ready.
Sorry,
but,
I was speaking to myself. I just wanted to say I highly support the what was said and suggested, and I think it would be great to not open a Pandora box, right? Within because all of this work has been developed, and I think Elizabeth, this last chart on the screen, it's great, and I think it summarizes everything very clear. And I agree with, I think Michelle had a great idea where it's just the matter of this group going forward with all this work. It's been done and it's great. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Andrew Dubinsky.
Yes, I mean, I appreciate you laying this out for people who are not zoning experts. I've only learned about zoning locally as it has affected me. And I would say, just based on this list here, I would definitely emphasize, as someone who is not an expert, the contextual zone approach, something that definitely reflects the existing zoning and not just what is allowed. My experience with the construction on 91st Street shows me that, FAR of 6.5 is totally out of character in terms of the height of the existing buildings. I mean, the median building height is like, we'll say 3 to 5 stories, and FAR allows you to easily build an 8-story profile. And if the buildings are over 100 years old, doesn't matter. You don't need to make your building look anything like them. Fine, that's just the way it is. But yeah, if you have something that weighs, I think that's what a typical resident would like, is something that acknowledges what the block looks like and minimizes the change, subject to, accomplishing other goals, of course. I'd also like to add, like, these blocks have contributed already in some ways to, supplying city services with the Marine Transfer Service, or whatever you call it, MTS, whatever the S stands for. And there's other things. So I just think that should count for something. I don't know. That's just speaking selfishly.
Thank you. Any other, Judy Schneider.
Yeah, I was very happy to hear you say that you're gonna go over each of these blocks. There aren't that many of them, and look at them individually, or if there are two blocks together, look at, the neighborhood and go through it. And if we do that and we see what's there, because I personally, in certain cases, depending on the block, you don't want to rezone something so that you lose the feeling of what's there if it's been there for many years and it's part of the community. I think if we do it piece by piece, like you said, I think we could attack each area with the kind of zoning that we think after we look at what's in the area and what's around it, rather than, I'm not sure that we need to do this survey at all. After listening to everybody talk, I'm thinking, well, maybe we should do what you're saying and then discuss whether a survey is really needed, because each area may be so different that the zoning that you would change, you would propose, is different for each area or each group of areas. So we may not need a survey, in effect. Just my thought.
Okay.
Helpful, thank you. All right, I think that was our last content slide. Let's go to our closer. This was our plan for future meetings. May 2nd, we will have a representative from the Parks Department to come and talk to us about the process of designating parkland and specifically looking at the asphalt green block. And then we want to, and look, I was telling the truth. We want to begin a block by block zone option discussion. So we will, Adam and I will sort of put together a schedule so that we can hopefully promote these meetings well for when we know we're going to be talking about a specific location. Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. That is exactly what I had in mind. But I would like to encourage you that when we get to that agenda item, that we actually have current visuals, which I guess we can get off Google Map or wherever, but a current up-to-date visual of what is on that block, at this moment, what is across the street. In other words, both the north side and the south side of the streets, in the cases of the side streets or the mid blocks, and also what comes around the corner onto the avenues, or at least within 100 feet onto the avenues. And I think that it's going to, I may be simplifying this too much, but I think what we look at is going to inform what we want to do very, very much. And I think it's going to direct us to the zoning use groups that would be most appropriate to that. In other words, I think I think those groups are going to automatically narrow themselves down once we seriously look at the neighborhood, at the context, you know, at the height limits, on whether or not there is commercial use, how much manufacturing use is actually on that block at this moment. I think if we actually have the right visuals, we'll be able to have a really good discussion, as long as we have the options for the zoning at our fingertips. And you did that very early on, and I think it was our second meeting where you broke down those zoning group, those use groups. You know, we need to have that at our fingertips, and I think it's going to inform us. You know, I don't think it's going to be all that difficult. I think if we pay attention to the parameters that you outlaid in our preferences and our assumptions and I think if we put that together with what is existing, we're going to be informed as to what we should propose. And then, of course, when that's all done, then it will be presented and we'll get feedback on it. So I think it's a great way to go. I think it'll work.
Thank you. Adam, anything you want to add?
No, I like how this developed. And I think this is going to be an easier way, and I think in the end it'll be a more productive way to come up with ideas, but then also gather everyone's input.
Yeah, this is a great example of the wisdom of teams. That we really do solve problems better when we work together and discuss. So I really appreciate everybody who has been attending, who is here tonight, and everybody who is providing their input, because it really does influence the outcome and it makes a huge difference. And I'm delighted that we are collectively seem to be on the same page of how to go forward in next steps. So I want to thank everybody. Do we have any old business? Do we have any new business? Judy?
Move to adjourn. And thank you both for all your work.
Is there a second? Yes, I see. I think that's Michelle seconding. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. We look forward to seeing you all on May 2nd. Obviously, we'll see all the board members at intervening dates. And thank you all for participating. And tell your friends.
Special brownie points for everyone who did that zoning and development meeting last night and who came back for some more punishment tonight. So you get an extra cookie.
There you go. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.